Good morning, everybody. My name is Tera Moore, and I'm the Program Manager for the Virtual Desktop Infrastructure at DISA. It's an honor for my colleagues and I to be here today presenting Privileged User Access and Management. Speaking of my colleagues, to my immediate right is Mr. Joe Hampshire. He's the lead VDI engineer, and next to him is Mr. Richard Abrams, who's the Chief of Identity and Access Management at DISA. The agenda slide. What are we going to talk about today? On Tuesday, Admiral Norton presented DISA in 3D. Part of her 3D vision was driving innovation. Our discussion today is a high-level overview of access management, file transfer, and strong authentication. We'd like to take this opportunity at AFCEA this year to connect with our industry partners and government colleagues to discuss ideas and solutions to this agenda and overview slide. While there is a question and answer session at the end of this briefing, we welcome open discussion with you through today to get all of your CEU credits. Presentation has to last an hour, and you don't want to hear me talk for an hour, so let's engage. Access management. The ability to manage network devices and servers through a dedicated network is critical to providing a secure mechanism to manage systems. The out-of-band network allows management connectivity that is built from a separate infrastructure from our production network. The ability for our system administrators and our mission partner administrators community to access servers that ultimately support the warfighter is paramount. In the audience, has anyone used an out-of-band network to manage their systems? Mr. Crumbliss, I think you're lying. Has anyone leveraged a production network to manage their environment? Access management methods. There are multiple options to establish a connection to the out-of-band network. You have your dedicated desktops, your mobile devices, your laptops, iPads, and then you have VDI using zero and thin clients to access the out-of-band network to perform system administrative activities. Joel, Rich, did you want to add anything to this?
So I guess for me, I would like to understand from the audience, what are some of the common methods that you use, or different methods other than what's posted here, that you may use in order to gain access to the environment? Does anyone have anything other than what's listed up there? I'm sorry, go ahead. Would you mind stepping to the mic so we can actually hear you, sir?
We use two-factor authentication a lot of the times with either cat card or a key fob, one-time pass.
So when you use your two-factor, are you using a traditional laptop? Are you using mobility? Are you using VDI? What are the different methods that you traditionally use?
Primarily laptop and desktop. We don't do VDI internally.
Is anyone in the audience using mobility at all, or using? Yeah, so I think we'll be talking about that in a couple slides, but there's this slow transition from the physical laptop traditional to some of the virtual and some of the different options. So we'll go into some of those details in a couple slides.
Physical to virtual evolution. Any evolution to new technology is a change, and if there's one thing we know for sure, people normally don't like change. However, as Admiral Norton spoke on Tuesday, she stated that driving innovation is in fact about growing, changing, and evolving. Joel, you want to take this one?
Yes, ma'am. So this is a little bit of an eye chart, but in the lower left is kind of your traditional environment. So as the gentleman spoke about using his traditional laptop, using his two-factor authentication to get into his environment, you have a traditional user which has an operating system on a laptop or a desktop, and they're connecting in. When we talk about access management, a lot of times you'll use a VPN or some other type of capability to provide a secure connection. And so you have your laptop, which your operating system, your CPU memory's on, and really what we're looking to do from a physical to virtual transition is to take those physical assets, that operating system, and actually run it in a centralized environment, which creates a level of isolation. So you're isolating the user, that would be on a laptop or mobility, but the operating system they're actually running on to access the assets to the privileged user environment is actually running at a data center. So it is a standard image, right? And we'll talk a little bit about some of the different benefits, but all the operating systems are run there using different technologies to support that, and it provides a different level of security. So we create that level of isolation. It's all running there. The data is backed up, and allows the end user to go ahead and connect into that traditional manner or non-traditional manner. And so the bottom circle is kind of that description that I talked about, where you have a VDI user. They could be using a zero client, a thin client. A zero client is essentially just, there's no real operating system. It's really just kind of like a hockey puck. So it just gives you COM, monitor, mouse, keyboard, allows you to connect in, and then from there, you're able to access your environment. And so the operating system is actually running at the data center, and it's just presenting the visual representation of your operating system, the picture, across the wire. And so that provides a lot of the benefits from an access management standpoint.
This slide compares the attributes of security, end-user experience, operational management, data recovery, and flexibility between the desktop and VDI. First up is security. In a desktop environment, the data is located on the individual machines. You have multiple baselines. Upgrades take time. In the VDI environment, the data is centralized within our secure data centers. The single security baseline means that we can make changes and push it out to our user base almost immediately. The end user experience. Joel touched on our users don't like change, so we like to focus on the positives of our end user experience. In the desktop environment, the provisioning takes days and weeks. It costs time and money. People aren't as productive. In the VDI environment, provisioning takes less than 24 hours, thus increasing the productivity for you and your team. Operational management, patch management is a resource killer. It takes time. It's less optimal to back up if you release a patch and it causes issues in your system. Rolling back is not as simple, and your help desk call volume is impacted. In the VDI environment, rapid rollbacks. The patch updates are instantaneous, and less causes fewer help desk tickets. Data recovery. Your data is not stored on your hard drive. If your employee loses their laptop, your data is lost. In the VDI environment, it's located within our data center. Flexibility. Access is limited to that device in a desktop environment. In the VDI environment, it is accessible anywhere by any device. Can you think of any other benefits to VDI or comparison desktop to VDI?
Yeah, so one of the benefits that we've seen is, in the traditional manner where you have a laptop, you're creating a VPN connection to access your environment, the VPN creates a level of isolation, right? So you are in that privileged user environment, so you can't have access to the internet, you don't have access to your company email, and so one of the benefits of VDI is you still have the ability to use the operating system that's in the privileged user environment, right? That's isolated and has access. Then you can also do your normal system administration or normal office automation functions, right? You can still use your email, those different types of things. And that's one of the real big benefits to system administrators and privileged users, where they can still operate in that environment. They don't have to, consistently switch off the VPN, go back and forth between email. They have the best of both worlds, so to speak. Anyone in the audience want to talk about some more benefits?
So we do have VDI in our environment, but what we found is that it's really dependent on connectivity. And so sometimes our users are challenged with bad connectivity at home, their ISPs, and, when they drop, they don't have access to anything. So, in terms of benefits, we completely buy into the benefits that are listed up there. But the reality is, if people can't get there, then they're dead in the water. And I had another question on the privileged access that you mentioned and the two, having the best of both worlds. Would that be on two separate VMs then? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I probably didn't explain it very well. But if you have, say you're at your desk and you have two monitors, right? So when you log into your corporate or government laptop, GFE, you're going to bring up you'll have access to the internet, you have access to Outlook, your email, all your typical functions, right? But you also need to access your privileged user servers and those different types of things to do your typical privileged user functions. And so what you need to do is, in order to access that environment, you would bring up a VDI client, right? So on your laptop or desktop, you would bring that up, and it would be another operating system. So you would have your operating system that has your email, your internet, and then on your one monitor, and then you just pull the screen up. Looks like Microsoft Word or anything else, right? But obviously there's the typical Windows 10 OS that everyone loves and enjoys. And so you just pull that up to the other monitor, and from there you would have both environments that you could work on in parallel. And you do raise a good point with the connectivity challenges, especially with teleworking, right? So from a disparate workforce standpoint, you may have offices all over the country, and from a corporate standpoint, you may have very good or adequate communications between all that. But when you do go out to disparate sites in different areas, it becomes a lot more challenging. And so you have people that have satellite, that they use for internet and those different types of things. And so every ISP is different and has different throughput requirements. And sometimes individuals have to work to open up certain ports, and things are really locked down. So it is really challenging from a end user standpoint and from a help desk standpoint to kind of help customers through. Is it really a problem at the data center with the VDI infrastructure, or is it just something that's focused with the ISP? And so depending on, that is a very big challenge with VDI overall. When it comes to a lot of privileged user management, there is a lot of requirements to be on certain sites and to be in certain locations to access it. So that does minimize it from an access management, but overall from VDI, it's one of the bigger challenges overall.
Hi, good morning. Denise Wagoner, DISA's Global Service Desk, Desktop Support. I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Are you tracking the MobiKey and that test case of MobiKey at DISA? It's the ability to use a dongle, putting in your CAC, into any device that takes a USB port. Mm-hmm. Your personal laptop, a machine, a desktop at an airport, hotel, it doesn't matter. It has a secure connection that way. Are they testing that with the VDI environment as well?
So we're not testing it with the VDI environment. I'm actually part of the pilot program, so I do participate in it. The one key requirement with MobiKey is you have to have a physical asset back at the local office, so to speak, to connect into. Mm-hmm. And so if that computer reboots or there's some challenges in and around that, at least from my perspective, VDI is kind of equivalent to the MobiKey, right? Where you're going to have, instead of having a device that connects into a laptop, you can either use a zero client or another laptop to connect into it. But I think they both have different use cases. I think overall, from an access management, there are some security concerns, I would think, around the MobiKey and the physical requirement of that laptop. But I think that's part of the pilot to kind of vet out and ensure that that does have the correct level of security, and that would be required for privileged users in particular.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of the key benefits for VDI for in a separate environment is the location of storage. So in other words, if you're running a zero client, what is it good about it? You have to lock. So it's really kind of I think one of the key benefits of VDI from a SIPR standpoint is being able to mitigate the open storage requirement. So basically, you pull your PIV out, what you have is a rock. So you can put SIPRnet in places that you normally wouldn't have it otherwise, or you don't have to have the safe.
Thank you.
No, very good point.
Hey, good morning. My name is Major Aldrich. I work with the Army Reserve. A couple comments on the VDI. One of the things I did at my organization, I tried to transition a couple of users to network-only access, and then the ESD help desk ended up talking to me sideline about they don't have the storage requirements or the storage capabilities at the data center to support having all the users have all their files on the network. So, and then with the VDI, are you talking like a Citrix access, or are you talking VDI on the desktop?
So, I mean, VDI is similar to a Citrix-like experience, right? It basically, when you log into it, you have a client. It's going to have its own operating system. But as opposed to Citrix, the operating system is actually running. It's just a virtual machine that's running at a data center is all it is at the end of the day. So instead of having that physical asset, it's just running on a virtual machine. But it is, similar to terminal services or some of the different traditional environments. But in this case, you just have your desktop, and so from your Windows 10 desktop, you're going to go ahead and launch different clients to connect into your servers, whether it's RDP or PuTTY or whatever your client application.
So, one of the problems I ran into was trying to piggyback my different CACs or different PIVs into the same session. So I got one running over here on one enclave and another one running in, and they're not matching up. So I end up having to switch out a lot, kill the session. It runs into issues.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem because I think in the next couple of slides we'll be talking a little bit more detail about how you manage different accounts from a privileged user standpoint. I think we can address that.
Okay, we discussed the physical to virtual evolution, compared the attributes of desktop and VDI, and then this slide is just highlighting the benefits of VDI that we presented on the last slide with the desktop versus VDI. Since I'm the VDI PMO, I kind of need to highlight our benefits. Make a special slide. Okay, securing the network. So to recap what we have discussed so far regarding access management, if you look at the visual there on your left-hand side, the user has accessed the NIPRNet via the device. From there, the user establishes a connection to VDI to gain access to the Outofband network. And you may recall, if you were awake yet and had your coffee, that on the agenda slide, we had a bullet there for file transfer, but we haven't mentioned it until right here. We were testing you. But seriously, though, this is a great place to put it because the file transfer was an issue and an important topic when discussing securing our network. Prior to removing that connection between NIPRNet and the Outofband network, our users could transfer files directly between the two, causing a big security issue for us. While the need of their function and their requirement to have that was known, we had to find a way to manage it, screen that activity. So the bottom line is that file transfer capability allows for scanning and validation of that data, preventing malicious data files from being sent from the OOB or NIPRNet or vice versa. On the right-hand side, again, VDI provides a centralized management of desktops and applications. The data is centralized and secure in our data centers, securing the network. By leveraging VDI, we provide a standard patch secure desktop experience to each of our users. Any questions or comments on this slide? Panel, you guys are quiet for once.
Just curious, those in the audience, have you dealt with transferring files in and out of like management networks or from your servers and then trying to get files back to the vendor for troubleshooting things like that? You got any experiences out there could share?
So in our case, we use a jump server. So you have access from Nipper to get to the jump server, and then you basically jump to the other side to pull your files off and move it internally. Scan, at that point.
Yeah, that's one of the mechanisms that we realized folks were doing. But from a security standpoint, we had no idea of what they were transferring, what times they were transferring it, just that audit log of what's going on and what types of data are exfiltrating the network and vice versa. So with our file transfer solution, as Tara mentioned, we have ways and mechanisms to actually audit what a user is doing. That way, if there was ever an incident, we can correlate that activity back to what was going on during that time. So for us, although it seemed like a slam dunk, as you would say, but it was more of a challenge after you actually talked to the users that were actually had that that task of getting their files in and out. So what we found was there's a lot of data going in and out of that network that unless you're one of the ones that were doing it, you would have no idea. So having a solution like this was great for us to track things in and out. So.
Okay, so we discussed access management and file transfer. We've accessed the out-of-band network, and now we want to access our Windows, non-Windows, or Active Directory domains. In the next slides, we'll discuss decentralized and centralized account management and the different authentication methods. Decentralized account management is simply depicted on this slide. You have our user, we'll call him Bob because I shared a cab with Bob this morning. So you have your user, Bob. Bob's a system administrator that manages both those Windows and non-Windows servers down there. The major disadvantage with decentralized account management is Bob has to have an account on every single one of those resources that he needs to access. A separate account on each resource is an administrative nightmare and a security issue. How many of you use decentralized account management in your environment?
Are there any other folks that are responsible for account management in the audience as a whole? If you had maybe yearly audits where you have to account for those accounts and have to say, hey, this person still has access, found out that, hey, this person left, but there's still credentials here. You know, have you had that experience? So
I actually left 2 months ago, and they still have me up here speaking.
So you know what a nightmare that could be, especially for privileged accounts. I know as far as when you're getting your audits, whether it's depending what type of audit that you're going through, and trying to hustle and make sure everyone is still there. The security groups have been cleaned up. That is just such a nightmare. In an environment such as ours, which is it's a pretty large environment as far as the amount of users that we actually have. Well over 100,000 privileged user accounts. Well over, if you think about the service accounts that has privileges as well, so you can just imagine how many accounts that people are trying to hustle and find and validate and prove that it's still valid or not. So the decentralized account method is not, the greatest thing, of course, everyone knows that, but trying to move from it is quite a challenge when you have a mixed environment with Windows and Unix and Linux and things of that nature. So I guess the next couple of slides will explain how we actually tackle that.
So now we're going to discuss different authentication methods. The first up is the classic username and password method of authenticating. I was supposed to ask the audience to raise their hands if they're still using username and password because they're going to tag you on your back, but I won't ask you, so keep your hands down. So Though they are still widely used, passwords are fundamentally flawed. Passwords can easily be guessed through social engineering tactics. You can look at my son's Facebook page and find out every bad thing you ever wanted to know about me. That's pretty much all his passwords. Viruses and malicious code also play a part in trying to obtain a user's password. So organizations have put policies in place to try to mitigate some of these issues. However, policy alone cannot reduce or mitigate all the risk associated with this authentication method. Most of the risks will only be efficiently mitigated by looking at a more robust authentication method. And I believe there was a gentleman earlier that discussed two-factor authentication, and that's exactly what we're going to discuss on the next slide. So two-factor authentication. Again, we have accessed our out-of-band network, and we need to access our resources within that network. We don't want to use username and password for all of the reasons we just discussed in the last slide. And the weaknesses and risks that will only be reduced by implementing a robust authentication method like two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is not new. It's about as old as I am, so like 20, 21. It's been around for some time, and it's simply based on what you know and what you have. We have some examples up here of the RSA token and then PKI. PKI is the DoD preferred method. Panel, did you have anything you wanted to add on this one?
How many people are doing two-factor for your non-Windows systems, Unix or Linux? Okay. How are you solving that? What solutions or what method are you doing that? Because natively, the operating systems don't understand like PKI. So are you using RSA or what are you using out there? Okay. All right.
ABack.
All right.
You ready? So we have evolved into a tiered separation environment. This is a high-level view of the separation in our environment that we've created. We've isolated our users, we've isolated the VDI solution, and isolated our server resources. All of our users are centrally located. VDI is how those users access the out-of-band network. And then our server resources are also centralized. Essentially, we moved to a centralized account management structure, which we will discuss on the next slide. See, I didn't lie. Centralized account management's next slide. Centralized account management mitigates the need for users like Bob that we discussed on the decentralized slide to have multiple accounts, a separate account on every server that Bob manages. Now I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Abrams so he can discuss what his program has done with regards to moving to a centralized account management and then the benefits of doing so.
So we actually heard a little bit earlier about the centralized environment where decentralized, where users are managed on each individual device and the complications surrounding that. And when you think about it, the risks that we face as organizations when you have users that leave and they still have accounts on those systems and servers can create some significant problems and issues. And so one of the things that we wanted to look at as an agency was how do we address that as a potential problem and mitigate the risks surrounding decentralized environment. So we came up with an approach that created a centralized user forest, and that user forest allows us to provision accounts for anyone across the enterprise that needs access to managed servers. And so we effectively removed all of the local accounts, so no longer are administrators being provisioned on local systems and have accounts on local systems and servers across the enterprise. And so what that effectively did, so if you're looking at the chart in that top portion where we see that user with the key, that user only exists in that one directory. So every single server across the enterprise now relies on that one directory. Now, obviously there's schools of thought in terms of having a centralized versus decentralized, but for the purpose of ensuring that we are able to bound that central forest and ensure that we put the strongest security around that was kind of the thought that we had when we were looking at this approach. So when we put that user into that central forest, effectively we were saying that every single server across our enterprise now had to rely on that forest in order to perform the authentication. Now, there are certain things that we have in place to ensure that users are listed appropriately. They must have credentials, an alt token. There's a registration process surrounding this, so it's not just simply you request an account and you're given access. But once that user is entered into that central forest, what we've done is create trust relationships, or a one-way trust relationship rather, with that central forest, so that looking at the chart, a Windows domain, naturally, if you're logging into a domain, it's going to look on that local domain controller or server, and if it doesn't find an account, if there's a one-way trust or a two-way transitive trust, it's going to reach out through that trust, permitting it knows how to get to it, and it's going to look for that account. And so effectively, we kind of leverage some of the native things within Microsoft in order to have that local domain reach out to that central user forest to grab that credential. Standalone servers presented a little bit of a challenge to us because we didn't want to create a whole bunch of trust relationships between a standalone server and a central forest. So effectively what we did is on the right-hand side, we created a resource forest where we placed all of our standalone servers. So across the enterprise, all of the Windows standalone servers exist in a centralized forest that allows us to create that same one-way trust, and the green arrows up there represent those one-way trusts. Then came the real challenge, our non-Windows boxes, right? So how were we going to associate those non-Windows boxes to that centralized Windows environment, right? So we heard earlier where folks were using ABack, which is attribute-based access control, and then we heard about RSA, but we wanted to use a different method. We wanted to leverage the fact that we had all of our users in a central directory and using Microsoft as a way to achieve that. And so what we did was we deployed a third-party agent or third-party solution that effectively joins those non-Windows boxes to a Windows domain, and it basically passes the Kerberos token or assertion back to that Unix platform or non-Windows platform to allow it to actually authenticate using the native features within Microsoft. So effectively, when we talk about a centralized account management, this is one way to achieve that. This is one way to kind of approach creating that centralized environment, and it effectively eliminated the use of username and password across all platforms. We were able to really standardize how we do things by ensuring that everyone followed this method, versus entrusting everyone. If I were to give everyone in this room the option to figure out how you wanted to secure your platform, we'd have 50 different methods of achieving the same thing. Some of them standardized, some of them, as simple. I mean, if we were all to be honest, some of us have accounts still shoved underneath of our keyboards because we have way too many accounts and passwords. Well, this approach attaches that PKI credential that you must know your PIN and obviously have that token in order to authenticate. And leveraging this process, we've effectively improved our security posture across the enterprise.
And to piggyback on that, I mentioned earlier we have well over 100,000 privileged users. So by centralizing that account management, we've reduced that by 80%. So Bob doesn't have 25 accounts across 25 servers. He now has one that's centrally managed. And in terms of account requests and account management, things of that nature, we do have an identity solution that we leverage for this. So we're not actually recreating the wheel per se. When users request an account, they must already have an identity within DoD, a CAC holder specifically. So if they are a CAC holder and they have the necessary clearance and things of that nature to become a privileged account management, we are able to leverage that identity solution that's already in place. So we're not sitting there hand jamming a bunch of accounts per request that come in. We're simply validating that the person is who they say they are, they have the clearance and everything necessary, and their active identity within the our identity solution. So account provisioning is automated in those terms. So a lot of places still have the old school way of requesting accounts and someone actually performing that function. So with our solution, we've automated that process, and it's much more streamlined than before. Yes.
So relative to that automation, that also includes the pruning of those accounts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are a privileged user and you happen to leave the DoD, and part of that is basically turning in your CAC card. So once you turn in your CAC card and that flag is put on your identity, for us, it automatically goes into that account that you had within our privileged user for us and disables that account and then deletes it eventually over time. So it's more streamlined in terms of going back and have to clean up all those accounts that that user had. As before, if you were using Decentralized, you would have to find every server that that user was given access to and disable that account and get rid of it. So for us, having an identity solution already in place that's tied into our privileged user for us is a great benefit for us.
So part of your solution looks like it is almost like an ABack solution, though. But you look at the way you guys are doing, how you guys are identifying people or personnel, and how you are attributing things to them. So why not just go to a full ABack solution if that's what you guys are doing to automate the entire process of that? So that way a DoD person changes organizations, leaves the DoD, automatically loses all access, automatically brings in those attributes. It can be more granular with who has access to those systems. Essentially, that's what you guys are doing, you know, in little bits and pieces, right? I love the concept, but it's the more you talk about it, the more it sounds like a really like a kind of beginning of an ABack solution.
Sure.
Have you guys thought about it, or just not to that point yet?
Sure. So we actually had ABack solutions in place within the enterprise. And in fact, when I came to DISA some years ago, that was one of the things that was within my portfolio. And you know, I would certainly be happy to talk ABack following the brief. But you know, for us, in terms of creating the separation and isolation and managing the accounts, this was the most effective way to do it. Now, ABack in and of itself is very useful. You know, I'm a believer in it still to this very day. Our agency, where we stood with regard to managing privileged users, we didn't think it was necessarily relevant to how we were taking this approach. But I would love to hear, you know, following a brief, how you would envision deploying ABack in this particular model and effectively how you would use it.
Absolutely. I just wrote a paper on it, so I'm really that's why I stopped over here. I saw this.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so in summary, there are multiple challenges in establishing a secure environment for our system administrators or privileged users to manage systems. I think the panel would agree with me that it has been a learning experience and one that we're continuing to evolve and grow into. The diagram to the left may look familiar. It was used to summarize our access management solution via the VDI desktop. Users utilize the file transfer capability to transfer files and data in and out of the OOB network. The users then gain access to the OOB or out-of-band network using two-factor authentication methods. They access their resources or servers within the out-of-band network. Did you want to add anything, Rich, to this? You kind of highlighted it all in the last slide.
Yeah.
So guys, we are approaching almost 15 minutes to an hour. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I wish we could give you extra credit for coming in first thing on the last day of the AFCEA conference.
Pretty impressive.
Since the O's games keep getting rained out, there should be no hungover people here. We're here to speak with you regarding our specific programs. If you want to talk with Rich or myself, we're here, and we look forward to working with all of you to continue to drive innovation. So thank you.